just read the scriptures.
I'm reading from Judges 4, verse 4 to 23. After Ehud's death, the Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazor, a Canaanite king. And then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Deborah was a prophet who was judging Israel at that time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel, and the Israelites would go to her for judgment. One day she sent for Barak, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali, and she said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun at Mount Tabor. And I will call out Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, along with his chariots and warriors, to the Kishon River. And there I will give you victory over him." Barak told her, "I will go, but only if you go with me." "Very well," she replied, "I will go with you, but you will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. And at Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 warriors went up with him. Deborah also went with him. When Sisera was told that Barak had gone up to Mount Tabor, he called for all 900 of his iron chariots and all of his warriors, and they marched to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Get ready. This is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you." When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and warriors into a panic. Sisera leapt down from his chariot and escaped on foot. Then Barak chased the chariots and the enemy army, killing all of Sisera's warriors, and not a single one was left alive. Meanwhile, Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because Heber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. Now Jael went to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come into my tent, sir. Come in, don't be afraid." So he went into her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "Please give me some water," he said. "I'm thirsty." So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him again. "Stand at the door of the tent," he told her. "If anyone comes and asks you if anyone's here, say no." But when Sisera fell asleep from exhaustion, Jael crept quietly up to him with a hammer and tent peg in hand. Wait for it. Then she drove the tent peg through his temple and into the ground, and so he died. When Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael went out to meet him. She said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." So he followed her into the tent and found Sisera lying there dead with a tent peg through his temple. So on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king. And from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. I thought I'd get someone else to read all those really tricky words so that I didn't have to. So that's brilliant. Thank you for that introduction. Also, Andy, my name's Emily, for anyone who missed that. So we might not have much in common here. I'm normally an 11 o'clocker, so that's already something we don't have in common. But we do all have one thing. Hopefully, we've all got a name. And in the Bible and in many cultures, names have really rich meanings. Our first child, she's called Matilda, which means mighty in battle. She was named after a warrior leader, not too dissimilar to Deborah from the medieval times, because I married an absolute history nerd. And sometimes biblical names are real. Other times, places were named after the fact because of what's happened there. Like we've just said, we're in a series at the minute called Horrible Histories, looking at the judges. So before there were kings, there were judges. These were regional, political, military leaders. And just for a bit of context, the book of Judges starts with the death of Joshua, who had led the Israelites after Moses. And the whole book is essentially a list of failures of the Israelites, equating to them being no better than the Canaanites, the people they were supposed to have driven out of the land. But they disobeyed God, they aren't following him, and it's not going too well for them. And at the start of Deborah, we get given two names, two places. And these could just be to give us an idea of location, where she is, but I think that there's a picture in this location. In verse 5 it says, "She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up there to have their disputes decided." So here we meet Deborah, and she's sitting between these two places, between Ramah and Bethel. And there's several references in the Bible to this place, Ramah. For example, in Jeremiah 31, it says, "A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted." So Ramah seems to be known as this place of weeping. And Bethel, maybe a bit more familiar to some of us, is a place known for worship. So we find Deborah sitting between a place of weeping and a place of worship. Not just a physical depiction of where she is, but a picture of where Israel was. Stuck between sin and disobedience leading to death and destruction, and a place of worship, an acknowledgement of God and his faithfulness and his reign. And I think this is also a fair portrayal of our lives, where we sit between Ramah and Bethel, between weeping and worship. Life can be hard, can't it? I don't know about you, but more Sundays than not, I walk in here wanting to weep more than I do worship. Where are you at today? There's so much weeping in our world, as there was in Deborah's story. But this is a story about victory. It's a story about somebody faithfully living out the call of God on their life, and in doing so, taking a nation from weeping to worship and restoring peace and order. And again, isn't that our call? Whoever we are, whatever we do, whatever background we're from, our calling is the same as Deborah's. To be people who take seriously the call to lead people from weeping to worship, from lack to plenty, from darkness to light, who lead the way in our spheres of influences, whether we've got the title of leader or not, to be people who bring restoration and transformation to the lives of others. And that's what Deborah does. She takes a nation who have been oppressed for 20 years and she leads them into 40 years of prosperity. The story of Deborah is one of victory. But in most areas of society, from war to politics to football, I'm told, the success or victory of something usually gets pinned on the leadership of it. And so in many ways, this story of victory is a story about leadership. I was on some training for work the other day and we were watching this TED talk about leadership, and the guy on it, he said there's 2 keys to leadership. He said, firstly, it's all about you. And secondly, it's not about you at all. And I think we could say the same thing about Deborah. It's all about Deborah, but it's not about Deborah. It's all about who she was, how she led, what she did, but it's not about her. It's about God's plans getting fulfilled through whoever and whatever was available. We live in a similar time to Deborah. As it says in the book of Judges many times, everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. Despite us historically being a Christian country here in the UK, everyone is doing what they please. War is raging, inflation keeps rising, poverty is increasing. You might be sat here pretty comfortable today, living a pretty comfortable life, but for many, that is not what it's like. And the scary reality is it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And we have a choice as to how we respond, how we lead others as a church, but also as an individual through it. We can get caught in following popular opinion or living in a way that avoids confrontation, letting everyone just continue doing what they want. Or, like we see of Deborah in a minute, we can respond to the call on all of us as the people of God to arise, to step up to the plate, to lead according to God's word and God's standard. You could say, well, I'm not a leader, I haven't got a platform. But as God's people, we are all leaders, in that we're told in the Bible that the world will get to know God by the way we live. Is that true of your life? Our whole lives are supposed to lead others to him. And there's an urgent need for godly men and women in our nation to take the lead. This doesn't mean more people getting a mic and standing on this stage. I think sometimes in the church, we can have a real misunderstanding of what leadership is. Leadership looks like being the one to go first in hard situations. It looks like being the one willing to serve and love even when it's costly. being the one who lives with integrity in a culture of compromise. Leadership is not a role or a status, it's a way of life that we are all called to. And we're called to release others into it also. So today we're going to learn some leadership lessons from Deborah. And these apply to all of us because we are all called to lead in whatever sphere of influence we have. So firstly, we're going to learn that she models how to take the lead. Secondly, she models offering support. And thirdly, she models celebrating the victories of others. So firstly, Deborah takes the lead. And it starts with her knowing who she is. Deborah's such an interesting character for a few reasons. Firstly, because she's the main character. She's not a subplot in someone else's story. She's the big deal. And this is significant when she was in a time that was so all about the men. But she functions on her own. There's some mention of her husband, but there's no mention of them working together. She had her own calling and her own giftings. Deborah's a prophet, someone who hears from God. She's a judge, settling the disputes. She's a warrior, helping to lead the nation to victory. Deborah is an all-rounder. She's maybe the equivalent of, these women we see on Instagram these days, nailing their careers, having beautiful houses and children, and somehow having a giant ministry on the side. But it's not Deborah's long list of credentials I want us to look at. The great thing about Deborah, and some homework for you later, is that we get two sides of Deborah's story. Firstly, we get the narrative, which Amy read for us in Judges 4, but then we get Deborah's song in Judges chapter 5, which is her voice. We read Deborah's story and we can think, wow, she did it all. But in her song, it's really interesting to see how she saw herself. In Judges 5, verse 6, it says, "In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned. Travelers took to the winding paths. Villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose, a mother in Israel." Deborah doesn't call herself out as a hero or a warrior princess. She identifies herself firstly as a mother to the nation. Maybe for some of us today, we're waiting for a role or a title, particularly maybe within the church. But if you're here and there are people younger than you in the room, then you've already been given one. To mother and to father. There can be such a lack of this, of people being willing to take responsibility for each other. And she doesn't get given this title or role. It says she arose. She steps up. We had a ladies' retreat a couple weeks back, and one of the speakers talked about people who are waiting to be released, who are waiting for the right person to give them the opportunity or the opening. And for many of us, maybe that's true. But like Deborah, we're called to arise, to mother and to father. What are you waiting for that is stopping you? How can you take steps, maybe even this week, to parent a younger generation? Deborah takes a lead because she knows who she is and that she's been called by God. Do you know who you are in this church? You're a mother and a father. And it's not just that she takes a lead that should encourage us, it's the way she does it. In a time when it's increasingly harder to take a stand for what we believe, Deborah models leadership that is defined by faith in God. Our world is so full of fear. World War III, unstable finances. Deborah has faith. She has a bigger view of God than she does her fears. What's your biggest fear today? Now, more than ever, we need people of faith in our nation who can see past the fears and the threats and instead see the power of God, whose decisions aren't based on their finances or what they can see in front of them, but who, like Deborah, when armies of 900 strong iron chariots are coming at them, they stand their ground knowing that God is stronger and that he has the victory. We've been wrestling a lot of financial pressures as a family recently after a building project that's gone very wrong, and trying not to give into fear when it's felt really crippling. Each week we've been praying in the finances that we needed to finish the work. Not entirely honest with our builder that we didn't know how we were going to pay him at the end of the week. But each week God has kept on providing. And week after week he has been so faithful. One way or another, provision has come. Miraculous stories. Last week, just to share one story, hopefully as an encouragement, we were hugely blessed by a surprise gift of £5,000. I literally wept my eyes out at the goodness of God and the faithfulness of other people to step up when God has asked them to. But there have been so many hard moments, so many moments in between the miracles of it not making sense and logically not looking like there was a way forward. It's hard to have faith in the middle when you can see the armies coming at you and you don't yet have the victory. But I felt really today, God is calling us to be people of faith in the in-between, who, like Deborah, know how to walk with integrity and stay close to God, to not compromise even when it looks like the easy way out. I felt specifically today that there was a word for us to be people who don't say no because of fear. Do you need more faith for the challenges you're facing? More faith to be able to stand on what God has said, even when everything around you says otherwise? Deborah takes a lead with faith, knowing it's all about her, but it's not about her. It's all about the one her faith is in, who is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we can ask or imagine. So Deborah takes a lead because she knows who she is, what she's been called to. She's got a big view of God. But there might be another reason that she takes a lead. I'm not going to go too deep into the roles of men and women in the church and society, but my personal belief is that there was design and purpose and difference in our roles. As in other circumstances, if someone's not doing what they should be doing, gaps emerge and someone has to fill it. Deborah lives in a patriarchal society where men are counted and celebrated and women often don't get a mention. But clearly, the men are not living up to the mark, so she steps in. I was giving away a dishwasher the other day, and a lady and her daughter came to my door just as my husband had gone out. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't lift this, or I'll have to wait till he gets back." And this lady, she bent down, she got her hands underneath the dishwasher, she very heroically lifted it up. She said, "I don't have a husband," and off she went. There was design for male and females, difference, beauty in difference. But there are times when men fail to do what they should be doing, and women have to step in. Where men don't lead their families in the way that Christ leads the church, in loving service. Where they don't lead them spiritually or protect the weaker ones in their households from harm. And so someone else steps in. I see it daily in my work and in my neighbourhood, women plugging the gaps of absent fathers, undoing the damage caused by abusive fathers. Men, don't want to put a downer on you today, but are you leading the way God has called you to? Not as dictators or lording it over others, but as loving fathers and husbands whose commission it is to lay down your life for others, to protect, to go first, to give it all up to serve the other. Please forgive me if I'm sounding like I'm having a rant at men. This isn't just my opinion. I grew up in, for most parts of it, a single-parent household, and in 2022, the national statistic was 2.5 million households headed by single mothers. And it said that 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse during their lifetime, compared to 1 in 7 men. Are we doing this as a church, using our roles and positions to protect and nurture others, not abuse and cause damage? Parents are supposed to protect, not dictate. Historically, maybe this hasn't been the case even within the church. Again, not just a rant. Look at the stories that keep on coming regarding the abuse of power from prominent Christians. Often, We see men in the church with more titles than women, and as women, this can be really frustrating to watch when rather than fathers, they become dictators. Don't mishear what I'm saying. I don't want to imply that women leading is second rate or not God's intention, or that women are never at fault. Hold my hands up to that one. But there are times when women end up carrying things that were not theirs to carry. Deborah steps up to mother Israel. She goes into battle because the one that God asked to do it wouldn't do it. And Jael, she's the one that kills the guy despite not even being on his team. Been on their team. Does this mean that either of these women are second choice? Absolutely not. But there is a message in it for all of us that God doesn't need you. That he can bring his plans and purposes about through another. Through the one that shows obedience, no matter their gender or their background. And you're going to be the one that loses out. We can look like the leader. Maybe we have the microphone. Maybe we have the more traditional leadership qualities. But none of that matters to God. He uses the weak, the unlikely, the ill-equipped, and he gets the glory. So it's all about Deborah. She steps up to lead. She knows who she is. She's got rock solid faith. But it's not about her at all. It's about God's plan getting fulfilled through whomever is willing with whatever is available. Secondly, and I promise this point is way shorter, the second leadership lesson that we learn from Deborah is that she offers support. Deborah, she knows the plan. She's heard it from God. She knows that Barak needs to go. But when he refuses to go without her, she doesn't just pack him off and tell him to man up and get over it, which probably would have been my response. She supports him. Some leaders and parents have the philosophy of throwing the kids in the deep end and hoping that they float. But Deborah doesn't. She supports another in their weakness. Despite Barak being in direct disobedience to God, it's as though she has compassion on him. And even though it's not her moment to lead, to be the one at the front of the army, she is willing to put her life and her reputation on the line for another. Deborah models loving correction in a beautiful way, not outcasting Barak or rebuking him, but standing with him whilst making him fully aware of the consequence. And for some of us, maybe that's our calling, to stand with others through their mistakes, to have compassion. But there must be a side where we make them aware, in love, of the consequence. Otherwise, we're neglectful parents that lead our children into wrong. To see leaders released, to see our kids step up, we're going to have to get behind things, even when we don't 100% agree. It's going to involve risk. It might even cost us our reputation. But it's okay, because it's not all about us. How easy do we find it to get behind others? How willing are we to risk what we've built to allow others the space to grow and thrive? But it's not just that Deborah offers support. This is a reciprocated support. In a time when everyone is doing as they please, the amazing thing was that everyone is following Deborah voluntarily. And I think this was a major reason for the Israelites' success in this battle. Because when God's people do stuff in unity, work together for success of God's kingdom, there is success. It says in Psalm 133, how good it is when brothers live together in unity, for there the Lord bestows his blessings. So often, though, as Christians, we can get obsessed with empire and self rather than God's. And that's where we start looking like the world again. Division and disunity are some of the best tools that the enemy has to stop us from doing what we were made to do. Like Andy said, we were about to plant a new church in Weston, and this came about partly because of another vicar's desire for unity. Because Darren, who leads the church a few hundred metres up the road, wanted God's kingdom to come more in Weston than he wanted his own empire to grow. But the amazing thing is, God is adding to his church weekly amazing stories of people getting saved and coming to know Jesus for the first time. Why? Because unity brings God's blessing. It's all about Deborah, but it's not about Deborah. It's all about us, but it's not about us. It's about the body. It's about a people for God's own possession, working together for one purpose: God's victory and God's glory. And the third leadership lesson we can take from Deborah is that she celebrates the victories of others. I grew up in the 90s and early noughties, and anyone who's a Christian then, you would have known the band Delirious. Give me a shout out if you're a Delirious fan. Well done. Kind of a Christian version of U2 if you've not heard them before. And one of their songs was History Maker, with the lyrics, "I'm going to be a history maker in this land." I grew up in a generation where it was all about us, what we were going to be, what we were going to do. And the generations since then, probably even more so, have ideals of this. It's so tempting to want it to all be about us, to get the glory and the praise for stuff. Tell me I'm a spoil sport, but I'm adamant that at Christmas, Father Christmas is not getting the glory for all of my hard work buying my kids presents. My kids are going to know where those presents have come from. But Deborah is willing to give the victory away, to celebrate others. Chapter 5, verse 24 says, "Most blessed women be Jael. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head." The thing that makes a leader great and a mother and father great is having the security to be able to acknowledge and celebrate the wins of others. How do you find celebrating other people? Calling out their victories, even when maybe in part it's partly because of what you've done. As parents, we're forever saying how proud we are of our kids, despite it, in all honesty, it being because of what we've given them or what we've taught them that's enabled them to do what they've done. But no parent says that, do they? No parent says on their birthday, "Thanks a load for the present that you brought me with my money." No, we celebrate their thoughtfulness and their initiative. Good leaders like Deborah are constantly looking to give away the glory, to see others step up and thrive. Isn't that parenting? Raising others to be better than we are, to go further, to have more opportunities. So many of the families that I work with, they would say, "I want more for my kids than I had." If we want to be leaders and parents to the next generation in our churches and our families and in society, we need to know that it is all about us. Who we are, what we model, how we do it, the example we give to follow. It's all about being something worth replicating. Is your life now worth replicating? Could you say to someone younger, "Do it like I do"? If not, what needs to change? It's all about us, but it's not about us. It's about seeing others go further, run harder, and be more than we could be. Not saying, "Well, I never got to do that, so you shouldn't." Let's not be stingy with the way we live, not being able to give away affirmation because we've never had it, not being able to parent well because we've not been parented, not being able to do the thing that God has asked us to do because we don't feel equipped. The grace of God is that he takes our weakness and through his grace, he turns it into what we couldn't be without him. He gives us what we don't have apart from him. He teaches us to be leaders and warriors and mighty people for his kingdom, despite maybe our less than mighty beginnings. So 3 things we learn from Deborah. Let's step up. Let's learn to offer support, and let's get better at pushing others to their victories and celebrating them. What are we going to do about that this week? Because we're all called to be a mighty army of mothers and fathers leading by example, like Jesus, for the glory of another. It's all about Deborah, but it's not about Deborah. It's all about us, but it's not about us. And some of us need to know that, because bottom line is, God will have his way one way or another, and we can get caught up in his plan. We can get united, we can work together for his glory, or we can get caught out. And our victories can go to another because of our disobedience. One way or another, God is going to get the glory. Will you be part of it? So to finish, in between Ramah and Bethel, between weeping and worship, there was a judge. There was a place for disputes to be settled, for sins to be confessed, for justice to be served, and for mercy to be offered. And we live in this place between worship, weeping and worship, between a life of hardship and a glorious one of restoration in eternity. And there's a judge who, depending how we approach him, has mercy but also judgment for us. The book of Judges, like our lives, shows cycles of sin, disobedience, repentance, and worship. Where are you at today? Are you stuck in the place of weeping, feeling at the end of yourself, not sure what's next for you, unsure how to get back to worship? The beautiful thing about the Old Testament is, although it might look like a long book of judgment, God is so merciful throughout. God is so slow to anger, so quick to offer a second chance. Maybe you've got your perception of God all wrong. Psalm 24 verse 3 says, "Who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart." All he asks is for a clean and pure heart, broken and sorry, that weeps over our sin and that turns it into worship. Worship over the fact that God would not only withhold judgment and the punishment that we deserve, but that he would lavish us instead with his blessing and the promise of eternal life through Jesus, and an opportunity to partner with him now. It's all about Deborah, but it's not about Deborah. It's all about how she led, who she was, what she inspired in others, but bottom line, it is not about her at all. It's about a God with a plan from the beginning of time to win back his people, to use whoever and whatever he can to get their hearts. He uses warriors, he uses women, he uses the most unlikely, and he makes them the main event. That's the grace of God. That's his undeserved favor, to take the weak to lead the strong, to take what looks unimportant in the world's eyes to bring his kingdom advance and victory. So let's stand if you can. Maybe you're here and you think you're not part of this story today. Maybe you're just observing. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that you are totally part of this story. Because there's a call on all of us today to arise, to step up to lead our broken world to the one who can restore it. Do you feel broken today? Unable maybe even of leading yourself, let alone anyone else? God says, arise. Last week, Chris called people to response to the front. And there was a lot of response. But I felt like there was a group who hesitated, who maybe didn't come because you're hurting, you're disillusioned. Maybe specifically you're hurting because of the damage caused by leaders or parents or those of the opposite sex. But I felt like today, God was calling you out. He was coming to bind up the broken hearts and to say, I know you're hurting, I know what's been done, but to gently remind you, it's not about you or what's been done to you or what hasn't. It's about him, and he's a healer, and he's a restorer, and a God of victory for the nations, for our nation, but also for individuals. Let that truth release you. That whatever has been before, today is a new day to arise, to step up, to be released from the past into a new future, where with him you also get to lead others into victory. So as the band play in a minute, I'm going to copycat Chris from last week, and I'm going to call us to the front again, not necessarily to get prayer, but just to respond to God, to come forward to and respond to the call to arise, to step up, to step out of our complacency and our comfort and say, yes, God, I will arise for those around me, for those who need parents, who need safe people, for my community that needs people of integrity speaking into it, for my broken world that needs to know God's Father's heart for it and his hope. So as we worship now, if God's calling you, come forward, let's respond, let's step up to that call to be the godly leaders that our nation so needs.